Hi, welcome to Blogging Hits TV. My name is Aryeh Cohen-Wade, and I'm your host on Culturally Determined. And my guest today is Milton Lawson. Milton, could you introduce yourself?
Hello there, Milton Lawson here, independent comic book writer out of Houston, Texas, home of the World Series bound and 3-2 leading Houston Astros, and ex-Blogging Heads video editor guy.
So thank you for coming back on Culturally Determined. I think this will be your third time being on, which I think is record tying. I'm not sure anyone's been on 4 times. A couple of people have been on 3 times, but you're joining an elite pantheon right now. So we're going to be talking about some stuff that some of it is related to comic books and the entertainment industry, and some of it is related to some projects that you've been working on yourself. And so we're going to start with the Watchmen series that's on HBO. We're taping this on Monday. The second episode just aired last night. They're putting a lot into the show. It's in the prime slot that had Game of Thrones and Sopranos and the Sunday night slot, and it's a very strange show so far because has the same name as this famous comic book series / graphic novel called Watchmen, which you just held up, that is widely considered the greatest comic book or graphic novel, at least about superheroes, ever made. And in some ways, I've been thinking about it as kind of like the Ulysses of comic books. It's
okay.
like, it kind of like changed the entire landscape of comics, and it's very intricate, and you can spend hours poring over it and finding these little connections and details all through it. And so there was people have probably at least heard of this comic by now. It's a movie came out 10 years ago, directed by Zack Snyder, that was at best kind of middling, and also many people did not like it at all, but it was weirdly faithful to parts of the comic and then changed other parts of it. So the comic was written by Alan Moore, who is, I think, the greatest living comic book writer, and maybe the greatest comic book writer of all time. And he has kind of like disavowed any adaptation or other version of this. So his name is not on any of the subsequent stuff they've done with it. The artist Dave Gibbons is still involved with this. And so anyway, Damon Lindelof, who was one of the showrunners on Lost and also did The Leftovers on HBO, has created this kind of sequel adaptation, reimagining that is really, like I said, it's really unusual because they haven't, it's not really about the main characters are not characters that were present in the original work. The original work took place in 1985. This takes place in the present. And there are a lot of new themes that really weren't dealt with in the original, specifically like race and American history, and the legacy of racial violence in America. Nothing in the original had anything to do with that. So people are both like puzzled, excited, angry, all sorts of emotions about this. So what have you thought about it so far?
Well, I think you did a fantastic summary, and I co-sign Alan Moore as the greatest living comic writer, as someone who has put his toe in the waters trying to write comics. Whenever I get stuck and I need to go to some source material, I go back to Alan Moore, and it kind of makes all of us just seem like we're just pretenders. He's just a master of the medium. And I know that Watchmen is his most well-known. I highly recommend people check out some of his other works, such as Swamp Thing would probably be the best thing to go for after Watchmen.
So he also did a couple of things that have been adapted into big properties in the past 20 years, which were V for Vendetta, probably the most, which has the Guy Fawkes masks and kind of like was inspired like a cultural trend of those masks. And From Hell was a movie. League of Extraordinary Gentlemen was a very bad movie. There were 1 or 2 others, I think, but a lot of his stuff has been adapted for the screen, and none of them have been very good. And I think that led him to say, like, I'm not putting my name on anything else.
Yeah. And a lot of that has to do with business-related issues. The fact that he is not rolling in dough from, or at least the level of dough he's probably deserved to have on Watchmen is due to some communications from the publisher that, if not downright fraudulent or, right on the edge of the letter of the law there, he really should own the characters at this point based on what he was promised. But the publisher got away with screwing him.
There's a long history discussed in a previous episode when I talked to G here about the death of Stan Lee, about the comics publishers screwing over the creators.
Yeah. He wasn't unique in that regard. And on the HBO series, I come to it both as a fan of Watchmen, but also as a fan of Damon Lindelof generally. The final season of Lost exempted. But I was blown away by The Leftovers, and I thought he was operating at the highest level of the television medium at the end of that third season. So I came to this with a lot of excitement and trepidation. But thus far, I'm extremely excited with what's going on. And the way you've described how much it differs from the original source material is definitely part of its appeal to me. It's a singular thing. It's within the spirit of Watchmen, but it feels entirely its own. It's definitely more overtly political and contemporary than Watchmen was originally. I do think there was a little bit of racial politics in Rorschach back in the original comic, but it was kind of very coded, like welfare queens, this and that, nothing as strong as the imagery and the thematics that we've got so far in the HBO show.
Yeah, Rorschach is kind of a Reagan-era reactionary, although there is no Reagan in the world of Watchmen because Nixon, the prehistory of the Watchmen universe is this guy is created through an accident during the Manhattan Project, and he becomes basically a living god, and he can grow to 100 feet tall. He's all blue, his skin is blue. He can rearrange matter with his mind. He can shoot laser beams. He can do basically whatever he thinks. And so he helps the government win the Vietnam War. And after that, Nixon is reelected, and there's also a little part where a character called the Comedian murders Woodward and Bernstein. So Watergate never is uncovered. Nixon is reelected and keeps on being president kind of for life because he was just so popular about that. So, but a lot of it is kind of like this world, this like gritty world of it's more like 70s New York than 80s New York, really, and so something we'll maybe refer to later, kind of a Taxi Driver feel to it, and so Rorschach is this urban vigilante character.
So much so, I have not read the original in about 10 years, and I started going back through it today in the spirit of our discussion and watching the show, and the first entry of Rorschach's journal just reads as a total Travis Bickle kind of thing. One panel in particular just made me smile. He's describing the street, and he goes, "The dusk reeks of fornication and bad consciences."
Right. So the comic is. So it looks great. Like everything about the comic is basically great. So like I said, it's almost like, someone was like, I'm going to write a sequel to Ulysses, but it's going to be, it's going to be a podcast or something. Like it's in a different medium. It's a sequel to something that's considered one of the definitive works in the genre that was closed. Actually, I mean, DC has brought back some of these characters in the past 5 to 10 years and tried to integrate them into the regular DC universe, but I don't think that's really been successful, and Alan Moore was not involved at all. But anyway, so then the show is just, in some ways, I was actually joking that it's like if I was writing a script about the Transformers and I wanted it to be about a welfare reform or something. It seems to be tackling issues that really have no connection, although maybe they will find connections to the original. And as has been noted a lot online, the very opening of the show takes place during the Tulsa race riot, which is a semi-forgotten piece of history that has been remembered in the past 20 years or so. where this is like the original meaning of race riot, where like white people would attack black people in a like it's basically like a pogrom. But there was even parts of it that I didn't know about, and I like vaguely knew about it, which is like airplane. This was like in 1920 or so. Airplanes were used to drop incendiaries on buildings. There was a part of Tulsa, Oklahoma that was a very wealthy black neighborhood that was called Black Wall Street, and some sort of incident that was like, you know, a black young man was charged with some crime, sparked this attack, and this whole like neighborhood was leveled, like literally like leveled to the ground, and it's still unknown how many people were murdered in this attack, because the bodies were buried and never found again, some of them. So this is the kind of thing that like they don't teach you in American history class generally. I can't remember how I learned about it to begin with, but I was aware that it happened. But you saw a lot of people tweeting things like, I'm 40 years old and I never knew this event occurred before I saw this episode of Watchmen. So that's interesting. They filmed it in a very like Saving Private Ryan, like verite style, and like it was very gripping. But it's also like what is happening? What should this be like in a movie with a giant, or in a TV show with a giant blue God figure, and or why is? I mean, I guess we have to wait to see why racial violence is what Lindelof wanted to do with this story, but it does still seem strange to me.
Yeah, it does seem strange, although it's fueling a lot of really brilliant imagery. Like one of the virtues of the show thus far is there's a lot of reversals of contemporary racial moments, but the races of the people involved in the moments are reversed from what we're normally accustomed to. Like in the first episode, there's a tense moment between a police officer and what seems like potentially a routine traffic stop that's going to escalate and go violent. And the police officer in question is black, and the tense person pulled over is white. But you've got that same rhythm and feel of all the viral videos that have been circulating in the past few years. And then there's a very graphic lynching in the story, but the person that's lynched is a white person.
And there's an elderly black man played by Lou Gossett Jr. who claims that he was the one who lynched him. And we don't exactly know what that means. It seems like, they're setting things up. It seems like they're setting things up for some kind of reversal. I don't know. So in this world, it takes place mainly in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and it seems like the government did acknowledge the massacre of the black citizens and implemented some sort of like reparations. They call it Redfordations or something because Robert Redford is president now, and he's been president for 30 years after Nixon lost or died or something. So it's kind of like, what if a like benign liberal like president for life had been president for the past 30 years, like what would have happened? And there's a very surprising cameo in the second episode, which is the historian Henry Louis Gates Jr., who is primarily known for doing things on PBS, but he's also a serious scholar, and he is the Secretary of the Treasury, and there's like a little automated kiosk where someone can go and submit their DNA to see if they were related to one of the people killed in the race riot, and then they could qualify for like government assistance. So it seems like there's been at least in Tulsa, Oklahoma, like the racial hierarchy has been reversed, and the black citizens of Tulsa are at the like top of the socioeconomic ladder, and then the white ones are below. And then there's this kind of revived Ku Klux Klan that is inspired by Rorschach, the character we were discussing earlier, the vigilante character, and they wear masks like Rorschach. So there's just a lot of, there's a lot of just crazy things in here. It's almost like they were like, okay, we're going to take this character from the original and like pick a like word out of the dictionary, and we'll say like, okay, Rorschach, KKK. Like there's really, we said Rorschach was kind of a reactionary character, but like he's not like, I wouldn't say he's a full-blown like Klansman. So there's just a lot of weird stuff here. In some ways I feel like it's I don't know, like he wanted to tell this story, and then he heard that the Watchmen property was available to make a TV show, and he's like, let's do both. and that's what we're getting. But again, it is like Lost in that it's clearly like a puzzle box, and there's lots of things that are going on that maybe aren't what they seem, or little clues are being planted of things that'll happen later on. So I'm going to keep watching, and I'm optimistic, but also kind of like this is just a very strange cultural product.
Yeah, absolutely. And what's irresistible in talking and thinking about a project such as this is the tension between honoring the spirit of an original, not recycling an original, and trying to chart a new path, and the trap of just recreation for the sake of recreation, the original, and doing nothing new with it. And I thought there was a moment that really illustrated that sort of nostalgia trap in the second episode. There's this interesting moment where this totally isolated version of what we assume is Ozymandias, but hasn't been said in the show yet, played by Jeremy Irons. And he writes a play starring his waitstaff that he is going to entertain himself with, that recreates an iconic moment from the original Watchmen. And so there's this like ridiculously, I don't know how many meta levels that is, but it's just fascinating to watch that.
Yeah, it's like a play within the play, like in Hamlet, but also it's something that if you read the book you saw already, but it's kind of different. But then also it's revealed that these spoiler alert, that these servants of his are all clones. And he every time he wants to put on one of these plays, he burns one of them to death, just for verisimilitude or something. And then they take the body and
we
put it
don't
in the
know
basement.
that he's a clone.
Well, okay, it seems like they're clones or something. They could be like cyborgs, maybe. But they all the men look the same and all the women look the same.
Yeah.
And so this character, Ozymandias, Adrian Veidt in the comics, is kind of spoiler alert. This thing came out like 35 years ago. He's revealed to be like the villain, seemingly a hero, revealed to be the villain of the comic, and he pulls this stunt where he sends a giant psychic squid into the center of Manhattan, and it kills 3 million people, and which leads everyone on Earth to think that aliens are about to attack, and so the Americans and the Soviets have to put aside their differences and stop threatening each other with nuclear war and work together to fend off the alien invasion. So he's kind of like, he's the smartest man on Earth, and he thinks he knows what's best for humanity, and he chooses to sacrifice millions of innocent people in Midtown Manhattan in order to, in his opinion, save the world. So this is seemingly the only character so far, direct character from the original, who's being recreated. And it's just, it's an odd performance where it's very unclear what is happening, what he's doing there. He seems like trapped by the past. And he says actually a famous line from the comic in at the end of the episode, nothing ever ends, which is what Dr. Manhattan says to, after he, has revealed the plot. Dr. Manhattan says to Ozymandias, Ozymandias says something like, was it worth it in the end? And Dr. Manhattan, the godlike character, says nothing ever ends. So they're using direct lines. They are using some of these characters. I don't know. Maybe this will be one of those shows that you have to watch the full length of before rendering any sort of real critical judgment, because there's misdirection involved, and so much is uncertain. But I don't know. If you have HBO, check it out. I would say, what would you say to someone who has no background with the comics, has no interest in comics? Do you think this show would be interesting to them?
That is a very fascinating question. I think so, just because on its own level, it's a fascinating world with all of these bizarre characters and amazing imagery. Like one of the cool things about the HBO version is, when trying to do something in the vein of Watchmen, you're going to want to have a Rorschach type of really compelling, nebulous-faced character. And they've done that with this character called Looking Glass, played by Tim Blake Nelson, who wears this chrome mask on his face most of the time. And it gives you a sort of, what you look into it is what you see, ink blot Rorschach-y sort of vibe to it.
And he's seemingly one of the good guys, although who knows exactly what's going to happen.
Right.
They draw the parallel with Rorschach very explicitly when he just takes the part of his mask up to his nose and starts eating something messily, which is how Rorschach would eat a can of beans in the original comic. But let's just mention the main character briefly, played by Regina King. Is that the actress' name?
Yes.
So she is a superhero mask, I think they call them. She doesn't seem to have any actual powers, as in this universe, really the only powered character was Dr. Manhattan. And everything and so technology changed because of him, but most of the superheroes are just normal people who, can are good at karate and stuff. So she seems to be just kind of like that. She once was a cop. It was revealed that in episode 2 that there was a attack by the Rorschach KKK, which has some name. Do you remember what it's called? It's still seven something?
I think it's the cavalry, maybe they call them.
7th Cavalry, perhaps. So they had an organized attack on the police of Tulsa at one point in the past and killed dozens of them. And they tried to kill Regina King's character, and she was able to fight them off. But it seems like maybe that's what inspired her to become a mask, and in her ostensible civilian life, she just runs a bakery or something. But so she's not explicitly associated with the cops anymore. And one of the kind of interesting things is, what is the show saying about the cops, and is it the good thing to say about the cops? Because obviously, over the past 10 years or so, whether cops are good or bad, and whether Blue Lives Matter or Black Lives Matter or All Lives Matter or whatever is one of the major political theme. And in this, the cops are presented as the good guys under siege from the white supremacists, and the cops start wearing masks also. If they're more just turtlecks or something that they pull up,
and they're held back by presumably the Redford driven anti-Second Amendment, hyper-regulated, they've really got to show and prove every little use of force that they ever want to do. Right.
So one of the very first scenes in the first episode, after the scene of the Tulsa massacre, is showing this police stop. And so the cop, which you described earlier, the cop goes back to the car and he wants to get his gun, but he has to call into the central headquarters and request that his gun be unlocked so that he can pull it out. And he's talking to someone, and the guy is kind of doesn't realize the severity of the situation, and is well, does he seem dangerous to you? And he's yes, unlock. And then he doesn't get it unlocked in time. The guy presumably the guy who was in the car shoots him. So yeah, so some people interpreted that as a, the liberal fantasy of how police work can be done in America is the cop has to get approval from multiple people before they can shoot anyone, because some people believe, and I would agree with this, that cops are too eager to shoot people in America. And then this showed, if this was taken to its logical conclusion, then maybe it would be way too dangerous for the cops. But then I think there's so we haven't even mentioned this character played by Don Johnson, who, spoiler alert, is killed at the very end of the first episode. So that was surprising that they get this big actor and kill him off immediately. And he is the chief of police in Tulsa, and he's friends with Regina King's character. And then it's revealed that seems like something else is going on with him, and Regina King is sneaking around in his closet and finds a Klan, robe and hood, hanging, presented like it's a trophy or something in the back of his closet. So was he, is he a secret white supremacist? What exactly is going on here? I don't know if we could say. But okay, what are your thoughts on how the police are being presented in this show?
Well, I'm fascinated by that part of it, just because they are in an era where presumably, if you're going to assume that this is some Hollywood liberal agenda-driven story about racial politics, grounding the protagonists in the imagery and the scenarios of contemporary police officers, I think is a zigzag where you're not expecting it. Mm-hmm. And it's just another one of those disorienting bits of originality. They keep the whole thing compelling. Another example of that to me is at one point, I think it's in the second episode, you get this African-American news seller talking about the news of the day, and he's just rattling off what's clearly a sort of Alex Jones style worldview where he thinks everything is a false flag. And it's just kind of interesting to see an African-American character criticizing a liberal president with that sort of a critique. And also along those lines, you mentioned about Don Johnson's character maybe being, he starts out, you think he's a honorable, justice-oriented guy who's against the Klan, but then he seems to maybe have the secret. But Regina King's character is skeptical of that because of her connection. But given the history of the comic, there's sort of a false flaggy type thing that happens in the comic.
Right.
And so is this a double false flag scenario? I mean, it's just, it keeps you guessing. And it's not clear exactly where this authority is leading, and the fact that our protagonist is within that realm, I could see it going either way. They could turn out to be some sort of nefarious structure in this world or not.
Yeah, I think it's interesting that they made the seeming protagonist a black female superhero, former cop. And in that way, they're at least pissing everyone off who has a prejudice against one of those things a little bit. Well, I don't know if anyone really has a prejudice against superheroes and will be watching this show, but they're scrambling it and not making it simple.
Maybe Mr. Scorsese.
Right. Okay, we'll get to that in a second. In the way that in the comic, you're led to believe from the beginning, because he's kind of the point of view narrator, that Rorschach is like the hero. He's like the detective investigating the comedian's murder. And like you realize more and more like, oh, this guy's a sociopath. and then at the end of the comic, he gets like blown to smithereens, literally, because he wants to undo the fact that, the alien attack was a fake. And that would have, meant that the, millions of people had died in vain. So he's kind of so he's, there was an interesting, I listened to a podcast that's called Struggle Session, and it was with, the guest is Will Menaker, who's been on Blogging Heads and is also primarily known for Chapo Trap House. And so they were kind of talking about Watchmen from like a leftist perspective and trying to say who was the moral center of Watchmen, and sort of like the naive reading or like the bad fan reading, like this whole idea that like Tony Soprano is good or Walter White is good. The naive reading is that like Rorschach is the moral center and hero, because like he was right about, he like wanted to do the right thing, tell the truth. And then I think but they were saying that Ozymandias was the moral center, because he was the one who was like willing to step outside the like conventional frame and like solve the problem of nuclear war through this extreme means. And I was thinking that it's really these two other characters, Laurie and Dan, who are kind of they kind of like after giving up their superhero lifestyles, they kind of like return to normal life and seemingly have like a happy life together. So I don't know where I'm going with this. We'll have to see who's the real main character of Watchmen, the TV show, and what is there one moral point of view being presented, or is it more complicated than that? Obviously, Watchmen, the original, is open to many, many different readings, which is why it's like, sustained as a art for, as a work of art that we're still talking about 35 years later.
Yeah.
Okay, well, let's move on to another topic. I think we spent a little too much time on that, so we'll try to do this one a little bit shorter, which is there's been a brouhaha over the past couple of weeks where Martin Scorsese, the famed director, and you can rattle off all of his films. I guess Goodfellas is maybe the most famous. Has said in an interview that someone asked him what he thought of the Marvel movies or the comic book movies, and he said, I don't think these are cinema, they're more like amusement parks or something like this. And this has pissed a lot of people off in a strange way. I mean, I don't know who would have thought that Martin Scorsese was like, oh yeah, Ant-Man, he's my favorite. He's not, his interests seemingly don't super align with the Marvel stuff. But what did you think of this whole, to do?
The to-do itself, I was not a fan of. The immediate reaction as a comics fan, I'm immersed in social media with a lot of folks that are, Make Mine Marvel, True Blue, just love anything and everything in all the formats, whether it's the comics, the graphic novels, the movies, the TV shows, and anything that encroaches on that territory in a negative framework, they immediately lash out and feel like they've been bullied and overreact and say a lot of really ridiculous things. And the initial social media pushback was beyond silly and hyperbolic. I do think that there's obviously a nuanced reading as to what Scorsese was saying, and myself as a fan of both the silly superhero genre and the oeuvre of Mr. Scorsese, I think that there's a reading of what he's saying that may be true for most viewers, that these are just pure escape. They are, especially if you see them in 3D or on IMAX, they are a big ride. And you can imagine this going further into virtual reality and those sorts of things that seem to give most audiences just a pure immediate sensation and nothing more. And the cinema that Scorsese tries to represent with his own films and with his massive history of guiding other viewers through the history of cinema with his documentaries and his commentaries. It speaks to the human condition, and you see the world through the eyes of all of the filmmakers, and that type of experience, I think that he feels that that's not ever there in the superhero genre. I actually differ with him on that point. Some of us actually do find meaning and connection beyond just the simple immersive sensations and bells and whistles and ups and downs and roller coaster aspects of it. It's very simple morality stuff. It's very simple themes about courage and facing your demons, and whatever metaphors you want to put on them. It may be insulting to literary criticism to call it any of these terms, but like just for myself, in the past year, I had a really creepy, horrible thing happen to me. I had a situation go wrong with one of my eyes, and I ended up having to have these uncomfortable treatments where they stick needles in my eyeballs, which is not fun. And the very first time it happened to me, it's the full on like Clockwork Orange. They open up your eye and it's multiple needles, because you have there's the needle that's going to numb you to the pain for the big ass needle that's coming next. And I have to say, I'm a total secular humanist atheist without greater cosmic powers to draw upon. And when that fucking needle was coming towards my eye, it was images of courage from films like The Matrix or Captain America that kind of put me through that. And I know it's a totally silly thing, but that's where I would differ with Scorsese, that there is some sort of connection, like a Joseph Campbellian mythological level for these films. So in my retort, yeah, it's fucking cinema.
Right. So, I mean, part of it is that, is there a difference between cinema, and film or movies or whatever other? It's kind of like, a romance novel isn't literature; it's just a book or something. So, in the world, yeah. So, if someone was if Harold Bloom R.I.P., the late literary critic, had once said, like he insulted Harry Potter.
Right. Yeah.
And when it came out, and he called them like, like penny dreadfuls, I think is what he just described them as. And kind of like, this is just for children, just like junk basically. And I remember when that happened, like people got pissed off that the snooty guy was saying that their favorite thing was, just like empty calories, garbage essentially. But I think like, there's a strong tradition of like genre storytelling that goes back to as long as there has been storytelling, like Gilgamesh or whatever, like some weird stuff happens in that. And obviously the Greek epics like have some unbelievable parts to them as well. So yeah, I just think it's like there's, we can exist with different levels of these things. And because this, the snooty old Martin Scorsese, dismisses your thing, that doesn't mean like, it's gonna be snuffed out or anything. And I mean, who is like, the market has spoken, obviously, that like people adore these movies and go back to see them again and again, and they've been ruling the box office for a decade and seemingly aren't going to stop anytime soon. And Scorsese can still make his little movies, whatever, but they're never going to be as massively popular. And probably the same way that like, I don't know, it's so complicated. Like, I think I think I saw that they also asked Francis Ford Coppola the same question about our Marvel movie cinema, and he said no. And like, Francis Ford Coppola turned The Godfather, which was basically the equivalent of like John Grisham or sub-John Grisham, popular, paperback kind of thing into what some consider the greatest movie ever made. So yeah, there's just all sorts of ways you can go with this. I do think some, there are some movies that are just like roller coasters, and I don't think you could like call an actual roller coaster art. Like that's it's some other different experience, or like an escape room isn't art or something. But you can, I don't know. There's parts of these movies that are like deal with real human issues. There's parts that are just silliness, and there's parts that are CGI spectacle. And I've people who have watched the show over the years know that I like things that are low culture, and I also like some things that are high culture. And I think it's fine to like both of them, and we don't need to like kick one out or anything. But I want to mention Ross Douthat wrote his column over the weekend somewhat about this, and also about what we're going to talk about next, at least briefly, which is the Joker movie. And yeah, it does kind of seem, I think, Douthat has been pursuing this idea of cultural decadence. And he's actually just announced within the last week or so that he's publishing a book next year on cultural decadence. And I kind of agree with him in some ways about the decadent nature of these movies, because they're not inventing it. They're not at their core something new. Like, these are stories that a handful of people made up, like in New York City, 50 plus years ago, and they're going through these stories again and again and again. And so there's like, we can't come up with anything new. Everything's a remake. And then like so much money and human effort is put into these things to make it look like that, a realistic alien is really coming down to the nation of Wakanda or whatever. And it's like, is this real? Like, should all these people who are great artists and computer scientists and so forth be like directing their efforts into making like the verisimilitude ever more fine? And it's, where everything looks like it's real, even though we know it's not. I don't know about that, but people should check out that Douthat article. I think it's interesting.
I unfortunately did not get a chance to read it.
Okay, well, why don't we? Do you have anything else to say on Scorsese? Oh, why don't you mention the little the like mashup video that you made with the Scorsese oeuvre? Oh,
thank you. It's not online yet, but it'll be online Tuesday, which is hopefully maybe before this posts online. Or I did a riff on. There's been a viral video meme of people taking this Key and Peele sketch, which is about Obama hugging a bunch of supporters after a speech with varying levels of embrace, and using that as a format to rank things, and the guy that generated all this used it to rank all the Marvel movies, and I just decided to do the same things with all of Scorsese's films. And it's kind of a limiting format because you've got this video that's already, all the beats are laid out, so you've got to slot in your choices. Right. So some of my choices are not totally perfect, but I'm kind of happy with it. It really represents my opinion on Scorsese's films, and like with Scorsese and with the Coen brothers, I think you can tell a lot about a film fan, about where they slot things. I'm a big fan of basically all of Scorsese's work. You know, I love them all, really, but relatively speaking, I've got my favorites and not so favorites.
Yeah, so that, I emailed you. This made me laugh out loud, literally multiple times when I was watching it, because I mean it's like, no offense to you, it's the underlying skit mainly that is funny. It's okay. We'll include the link to it, and people can watch it. Okay, so the transition here to our next topic, which is the movie Joker. It's just Joker, right? No, not the Joker.
Yeah.
Joker is that. So you've seen the movie. I haven't seen the movie, but I have seen a lot of people chattering about it because this seems to be maybe the most chattered about movie of the year, which is strange. But it seems like a lot of the movie is an homage to 70s Scorsese movies, in particular Taxi Driver and King of Comedy. At least that's what the interpretation of some critics. So what do you agree with that? And what did you think of Joker?
I think that's more than an interpretation. I think that's like the mission statement of the movie. And one of the primary disappointments in the film is that it doesn't really deliver anything more than that, other than really almost flawless execution on all the technical levels of delivering that promise. You get Taxi Driver plus King of Comedy equals Joker. That's the equation. You get nothing more other than the fact, first of all, you know, Joaquin Phoenix, it's no mystery or secret that this guy is one of our most talented performers. And you see there's something about the character of the Joker that's very attractive to actors. It allows them to bear some sort of psychic depth about themselves and release it onto the screen with this just furious power. And he definitely delivers on that score. I'm a little baffled why there's Oscar buzz for him. I don't understand that particular aspect of the hype, but my favorite part of the movie actually is totally orthogonal to all of the discussion thus far about it. And it's just that it's my favorite depiction of the city of Gotham in the history of movie adaptations of Batman. The city itself is a character. It's a social force. And you're the guy with the literary acumen that I don't have. What is that famous Saul Bellow quote about a city like grinding you down to like a pearl or something?
Oh, I don't know that one.
Way to the ocean. You know the one I'm talking about from Augie March. I can't remember it.
I can't. If I did read Augie March, but about 15 years ago. I don't remember that quote. But
so there's something about just the gravity of the city just weighing you down, and the choice of making an entire film about the Joker, that's the angle that they took. They took all of Gotham sort of weighing down on this one character and where it went. And, it's not as original as like the Tim Burton stylings visually. It totally is just a ripoff of Taxi Driver visually, but it works really well.
Okay. So it looked cool. And what do you think? So, what do you think of the scene that's become somewhat iconic, especially on Twitter? It's on the poster of him dancing down the concrete steps. What do you think when you saw that?
I think one of the problems with the movie is that it doesn't really exceed the trailer any. I mean, it's just like an extended version of the trailer, and that moment almost kind of works better in the trailer than it does in the context of the film. Because the character goes through an arc of depravity. He's sort of a forgotten discard of Gotham society, and he's forged into this evil, iconic character through that journey. And by the time that scene happens in the movie, he's far gone, fucking total evil. So you can't really totally embrace the let your freak flag fly cinematic joy of it. But it's amazing visual, and it's performed well. I mean, it's a lot of fun. And apparently, like, people are, wherever this really happened, people are taking photos of themselves or something.
I think I just read somewhere, it must have been on Twitter, that it's in the Bronx somewhere. And yeah, I was joking that, like, people are going to seriously injure themselves trying to recreate this scene on either these stairs or other stairs. Like, in their, if they're in their house in their socks or something, they're going to fall down the stairs. And then if they're on this, like, 3-story concrete staircase, they might, they might seriously hurt themselves. So don't do that if you're out there. But yeah, but okay.
There's one other unavoidable part about this, and I hesitate to tip my toe into these waters because it's just a shark-infested area. But I was surprised at the level of prejudgment of the film. There was a lot of anger about just the existence of the film from folks that I would consider ideologically sympathetic to myself on the political spectrum. The far left, which I kind of consider myself part of, just came out claws, ready to tear this thing down and decry even the existence of it. And the primary critique was that they felt that it would make you feel empathy for a character that's like one of these toxic incel jerks that's ruining online discussion to begin with. And I think you can make that strained comparison if you really want to, but I don't think that that's the film that the filmmakers intended to make. And I would never disagree with anyone who would want to make that judgment for themselves. Like, hey, that movie's not for me. I don't want to see it. It seems like, not something that I would find enjoyable. And I totally respect that. But where that turned into like a pre-boycott and a damnation and making this totally untouchable film, I didn't get it beforehand, and I don't get it afterwards. If you're going to make that kind of moral critique of the film, the same exact moral critique could be made of Taxi Driver. And I just don't think it holds a lot of water.
Okay, yeah. Like I said, there's been an incredible amount of chatter about this movie, especially, and a lot of it before anyone actually saw it. And I don't know, I don't exactly understand why that happened. Maybe it was some sort of marketing plan by the studio to get people riled up, and so they're talking about Joker, and then you feel like you have to see it to understand what the whole controversy is about. But yeah, there's this there's this false idea that the shooter in Aurora, Colorado, in 2011 or whatever it was, at Dark Knight Rises, was dressed as the Joker when he shot up the movie theater. That apparently was reported shortly afterwards, but he was not. He just had dyed hair, but he didn't have any face paint on, and he didn't say "I'm the Joker," which was apparently even reported in the Times or something. But that idea, I guess, was irresistible to the minds of many people, that someone would dress up as a supervillain and then actually go kill a bunch of people. So that stuck in people's minds, and so some movie theaters had things posted saying undercover police officers are in the screening in order to protect anyone from these spree killers who are eager to shoot up a theater. So that was kind of hysteria level overreaction. Yeah. And people will get shot up in Walmarts and all sorts of other places in America because there's a lot of guns in America. So
yeah. It reminds me of the hysteria around, Hinckley shooting Reagan. Taxi Driver was kind of blamed for that very wrongly and stupidly. I mean, the guy was clearly psychologically disturbed. Yeah,
and then there's just this, this is too broad a topic to start into now, but there's this whole discussion that's been intensified over the past 5 to 10 years about the moral place of art and whether if let's say art is created by someone who we know is a bad person, art has some sort of like problematic part in it. If a character who is a bad person is presented sympathetically, then like that's either bad or like could be actively harmful to the like simple-minded people out there who see a sympathetic portrayal of the Joker and then think, well, maybe I'll be like a Joker. There actually was a really funny tweet that said, this must have been before the movie even came out, that said, I didn't like how in the final scene of the movie, the Joker turned to face the camera and said, now you do Joker stuff. Like people just maybe a child would act like this, but you're not bringing a child to this movie. So that's just a stupid way to think about art that's going to like cause these direct actions. And, sympathy for an incel, like, you can have sympathy for someone without like agreeing with them or with how, you can still lay some sort of moral blame on them, even if you have sympathetic feelings towards them. Like that's like part of art is supposed to be like exposing like people who are different than you, and you develop some form of sympathy for them. Whether that sympathy like can carry over into the real world, I think is no one really really knows, and probably doesn't could never work very strongly. But yeah, it's all been very strange, and but I guess like I said, the market has spoken on this one too. It's like one of the best openings for an R-rated movie, and weirdly, like some of the reactionary types on Twitter were like celebrating that because it became a culture war object. They were like, like that guy Ian Miles Chong, I think was boasting about how good the movie was doing. So it's like, it also just falls into the everything is culture war, everything is left, right, and people just want to fight all the time online, and and we'll just move on to the next thing to fight about in a week or so. But would you recommend people see this movie if they haven't seen it yet?
Yeah, I mean, if you're on the fence, I'd give it 7.5, 8 out of 10. Todd Phillips is kind of limited as far as a filmmaker goes. But he delivers what's on the tin. It didn't compromise. There could have been a cheesy way out at the end, I think, and they didn't do anything where they would hold back. So they committed to the outline and the premise and delivered. I think it's pretty entertaining.
Okay. Yeah, I have to.
My one ultra comic nerd disagreement with the film, though, is this particular incarnation of the Joker, in my opinion, could never be a useful foil to Batman. He doesn't have any cognitive abilities that seem at the like strategic level to where he could really screw with Batman. Mm-hmm. This guy, if he went up against the Batman, he would be over 12 seconds into the story. So
that's interesting.
If they could have just shown there, maybe with just one scene of him demonstrating some sort of genius that was hidden, I think could have gone a long way towards really fitting in with the comic world. But I think they were explicitly not wanting to do any of that. They were more interested in doing some sort of character study.
Right. And so they're rebooting Batman again with Robert Pattinson playing Batman.
I don't live on the world where that occurs. I'm in denial of that.
Okay. So, yes. The fourth or fifth iteration of the Batman character on the silver screen is going to film and come out in a couple of years. But have they discussed? It seemed like they were talking about Penguin being the villain in that one. But I mean, would they usually with these movies they sign them to you have to do at least 3 of these superhero movies so that they're sequels. Do you think they'll ever bring in? Because after what you just said, Batman can just punch him in the face and he'd be done with or whatever. Could they bring a Walking Phoenix Joker in?
I don't think they could. I think the timelines would prohibit it. This one feels like it's set in the 80s. Mm-hmm. So unless the new Matt Reeves Batman is in that same time frame, and I don't think it's going to be, I don't think that could ever happen. So maybe there could be a new Batman within that world because it's so successful, which I would like to see that. And I'm probably begrudgingly going to go to the Twilight dude's Batman at some point, even though I've not seen. I've admittedly skipped most of his films that are supposed to actually be good, just because I saw him in the Harry Potter films and thought he was dreadful, and I didn't ever want to see that dude's face on a screen ever again. But many of my friends are trying to convince me that he's got talent. So
yeah,
I'm sure at some point I'll go.
Yeah, I actually don't think I don't even remember him from Harry Potter, but I did see some of the Twilight movies. They weren't particularly good, but yeah, he has like gotten a reputation as being an actually good, serious actor since then. So I'll withhold judgment, and we'll have to see. Okay, so we've gone almost an hour. Do you want to just talk about your projects, or was there another topic? We thought about Star Wars trailer, but I guess I really don't have anything to say for Star Wars trailer.
No, I had to switch hats just because this is the golden era of the Astros. I got to show off all my hats. Right.
So is that the 70s? Is that the 70s hat?
Yeah. Well, this technically, like the one that I've got right now, has got a rainbow bill on it. Uh-huh. They never actually wore one like this. This is just kind of a artistic interpretation.
I see. Okay. Well, why don't we talk about your projects? So one of them is about Orson Welles, but in a fantastical way. So why don't you describe that one?
Yes, I just launched today a campaign to fund a graphic novel called Orson Welles, Warrior of the Worlds. And it's about Orson Welles and his secret life defending Earth from aliens. The premise is basically the legendary War of the Worlds broadcast that got broadcast in 1938, which we all thought was a dramatization. Turns out that an actual alien invasion really happened, and Welles happened to participate in it and became ensnared into a secret organization to defend our shining jewel of Earth from all sorts of incursions from the alien worlds. And the story is actually, we're hoping to do a 2-volume epic story that is going to span the entire career of Orson Welles. And there's going to be, each chapter is illustrated by a different artist. And each chapter, not every single one, but most of them are inspired by a film from Orson Welles' canon. Mm-hmm. And each artist is going to deliver something that's kind of in the style of one of those films. Wow. And the first volume has like 5 or 6 different artists contributing to it. There's a noir chapter. There's a Citizen Kane inspired chapter. And it's a whole lot of fun. I'm getting to work with a lot of really talented artists. And it's just a fun idea.
Yeah, it looks cool. So you sent me, I guess this will be viewable on the Kickstarter page, a kind of animated trailer for it. And who did you get to do the voice for, the Orson Welles voice? Because that seemed almost exactly like the voice I remember from when he was like on The Critic and other like appearances.
Well, it's voiced by the incomparable Maurice LaMarche, who has done several different incarnations of Welles imitations throughout his career. Okay. I think the main one most people know him from is from a series called Pinky and the Brain, which was birthed out of Animaniacs.
Right. Okay. How'd you get him? That's impressive.
He is just an insanely generous person. I met him at a comic convention. I showed him the proof of concept of the project. And I said, what we'd really love to do is we'd like to do a trailer and have Orson Welles narrating it. And the best way to get Orson Welles to narrate something is to get you to narrate something. And he immediately went into Orson voice mode. Mm-hmm. Like when I was interacting with him, he was flipping through the pages I showed him, and he was talking to me as Orson. And up until that point, I had been working on the project already for about 6 months and researching the life of Welles. And, I've been a lifelong fan of Welles. And so it was kind of weird and surreal to almost be talking to Orson Welles. Mm-hmm.
That's really cool. He probably was also the guy doing the voice on The Critic. That'd be my guess.
I think he was.
Yeah. And what he says, the immortal line that I remember is, at least I think this is The Critic, is when he's eating these frozen peas, or he's doing a commercial for frozen peas, and he says they're full of delicious penis, and then he storms off the set. I was like dying when I saw that. It's like at age 9. So okay, that's really cool. And then just a fun fact: I'm in Princeton, New Jersey currently, and the place where the attack happened, supposedly, allegedly, is very near here. Grover's Mill.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So I think it's essentially an unincorporated, land spot, and so there's not really anything there. But there's a coffee shop that's in the general area that is called like Grover's Mill Coffee, and all the decorations inside are War of the Worlds stuff from different various incarnations, posters and news clippings from the original and paintings and stuff. So Central New Jersey is where where the strike happened. Okay, and do you want to talk about the documentary also?
Sure. Yeah. This summer I released a documentary, and it's titled Tabling. It's basically a grounded view of what it's like to be on the other side of the table at a comic convention. I know that there's been a lot of discussion and sort of cultural immersion in the idea of the comic book convention. It's kind of gone really mainstream, and there have been a lot of TV shows that have had episodes take place at a convention, and cosplay has exploded and is all over social media, and there's usually a big show every month or so. So it feels like comic conventions are entering into the cultural zeitgeist a bit in the past few years. And I went to a show that's very independent, creator-oriented, called Heroes Con in North Carolina. And I just kind of observed some friends and collaborators that I know while they were setting up their tables, while they were interacting with customers. And also I interviewed about a dozen people that had tables at the show, talking about their experiences, not just at that show, but other shows throughout their career. And I basically ran the gamut from someone who was having a table at the show for the very first time, all the way to some folks who had been to thousands of shows and had movie deals signed up based on their properties. So I think it's a fun thing. It's on Vimeo. Just search for Tabling, a Comic-Con documentary, and you'll find it.
Okay, and on the Blogging Heads page, we'll put the link below. It does seem like a weird experience, and there's like fan conventions are becoming more popular, and I guess people are not embarrassed to go to them in the way that maybe they were 30 years ago when I was a kid. And so, just sitting there, the people who sit there and are shaking hands and taking photos and trying to make some money for a long day, it does seem like a very strange experience. Have you been the person sitting behind the table?
I've only done it a few times myself. And hopefully next year, I didn't do a lot this year on the convention circuit, but next year I plan to go to several. So I'm still kind of learning.
Yeah. Well, it's good to see that the DC and Marvel have become ever more powerful, because of the movies and also just kind of like market consolidation. At least it seems to me, as someone who hasn't paid super close attention to the industry, that so it's good that there's still independent creators are still working and are putting things out there. And I assume that the online world makes it easier to, for a independent creator to at least get noticed for something than it would have when we were kids.
Yeah. And that topic actually comes up in the documentary about the relationship between building fan bases online and interacting with people at shows. It's an interesting kind of weird sort of symbiosis that happens.
Okay, so we've gone just over an hour. We should probably end it there. So check out Milton's Kickstarter and his documentary.
Please give me money.
And You can subscribe to the show in iTunes or Stitcher or wherever. You can rate and review it even. You can do all sorts of things. You can follow Milton. You're Citizen Milton, is that right?
Yeah.
Citizen Milton on Twitter. I am REACW, ARYHCW on Twitter. You can follow us to your heart's content. So thank you, Milton, for coming on talking about comic books and other things. And maybe you will come back on a fourth time. And I think if you did so, you would be the first person to be on this particular show 4 times. I'll have to check the records, but so the competition is on to see who will be the first person to be on here 4 times.
I'm honored, sir.
Okay. So thanks, Milton. I'll talk to you later.
All right. Thanks.